Somebody told me that you had hired to another person. Is this a rumor?
Just a rumor.
Our microphones are on?
That's an odd one.
Okay. So 1:31, we'll convene the Mendocino Council of Governments to order, and if you could maybe call the roll.
Okay. Susan Ranachek?
Here.
Okay. John McGowan?
Here.
Steve Stransky? I'm sorry, Larry Stransky?
Yes.
Steve Scalamini?
Here.
Richie Wasserman?
Here.
Tom Varga for City of Fort Bragg as a non-voting alternate? Okay. Rex Jackman for Caltrans?
Here.
And Dan Jurdy, Chair?
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to convene as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency, immediately recess and reconvene as the Policy Advisory Committee of the Regional Transportation Planning Agency. And the first thing on our agenda is public expression. Participation is welcome in our meetings, and comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person, no more than 10 minutes per subject, so that everyone can be heard. Do we have any public comments on non-agenda items? Okay, seeing none, we'll go right into first regular item, which is consideration of State Route 1 traffic issues in Elk.
Mr. Chairman, those of you who were at our meeting in February may recall this was on our agenda. Happened right after a whole series of storms. Mr. Norman Duvall was scheduled to come and address the board at the time regarding several issues that he had noticed in the Elk area. I had been in correspondence with him since then, and he is in the audience. You have my staff report. I would note that I went back and reviewed the what I had said when he was not here at the February meeting, and said that I had intended and will continue to work with Caltrans and even the CHP in resolving some of these issues, and that still fully intend to do that regardless of what happens today. So with that, and unless there are any questions, Mr. Duvall is in the audience.
Norman Duvall for the record. First, a question. How many minutes do I get?
Five or 10?
Oh, fine, thank you. That's more than enough. Elk is an isolated little town on the Mendocino coast. Most of you know it. The only street in town is a highway, so-called, that is 25 minutes away from the closest hospital. Why do I mention that? Because there aren't any doctors in Elk. We don't have any engineers or traffic safety engineers either. So I'm speaking for the whole town. There's not one person who is opposed to my being here asking for some resolution that we all consider dangerous. In sum, I could conclude very early by saying that I'm very happy that you will support a change in the highway speed law in the state of California, specifically stating that when a state highway runs through and is the only street in town where there isn't adequate pedestrian passage except in a highway lane, that there will be adequate patrol, there will be some consideration given on how to, for the public, either parking, transiting, walking, or bicycles. The town of Elk has 5 B&Bs. Inside of the State Museum is a room reserved for BLM. Elk is to be the gateway, the entryway to the California National Monument that was dedicated by Bill Clinton. And in those 5 B&Bs, they are all walking to, north and south, hopefully off the highway, but usually in the highway, to get to the entry to the park, or to the museum, or to the restaurant by what used to be a gas station. The Highway Patrol has heard from me for years. I've owned the property in Elk since '77. Those days are gone. We've got an ever increase of traffic and more visitors. And despite the fact that we have had to close the school, we closed the gas station, the bread arrives frozen, you check the date on the milk carton. Parts of the town are still very sleepy and very isolated. And other parts of the town, especially on weekends or on the Friday or Monday, on either side of that weekend, we've got a lot of people in town and they're walking. I'm sorry I'm not techie enough, I live in an old style, to have something on the wall to show you perambulators, kids on bicycles in the traffic lanes. And that's how they go through town. The parking and the amount of reconstruction in the town is amazing. Millions of dollars have been, it's the largest redo of a majority of any place in the county, I believe. The Greenwood Pier has over $3 million of improvements and developments. Harbor House is a completely redo. We are laying new pipeline. The first group to pass a resolution saying that this town is dangerous was the Elk County Water District. The Community Services District has passed a similar resolution. The public has signed petitions. The Highway Patrol is aware. And every other car is speeding. There was a time when the Highway Patrol was there, well hidden, and they could not stop writing tickets. They could balance the state budget with more attention in the town of Elk. The Caltrans marking is inconsistent. It has, what's it called, Phil, this radar thing?
Radar feedback signs?
Thank you. Well, they've got one going north up a hill, and unfortunately not at the top of the hill. They don't have any coming south. They've increased the signs. People pay no attention because the Highway Patrol is not there. Caltrans widened the road. People park right out to the white line, but there's no sidewalk on the other side of where the vehicle parks. Thus, people are forced into the traffic lane. So I could go on at length, but it's a Caltrans issue. It's a Highway Patrol issue. It's also an issue, and I believe that MCOG should be a recipient for a CEQA review on all projects in the town of Elk to make sure that in the traffic and circulation traffic element in the local coastal program that there is some consideration given to where are people going to walk. Eventually they drive or all walk to the beach. So we are intentionally and purposefully and knowingly asking people to walk in the street, on the highway, to get to where we've invited people to come. We do not understand the logic. We don't understand why. If we were a city, we would have far more control of this, the aspect in our lives that seems to have no resolution thus far. So, I'm sorry that more people from Elk aren't here today. That they said, Norman, go home, go over there and take care of it, because we're just going to say what you're going to say. And what I'm going to say is that to continue this is knowingly to not enhance, but knowingly to place the public at risk and in danger. And when I opened and when I said we don't have any doctors in town and how far away the hospital is, we do have a volunteer ambulance. It's still a long way away. We're laying new pipeline for the water district just on the outside, and Caltrans would be able to tell you, and possibly Phil as well, about what part of that highway is actually owned. Does the highway have an easement, or is it in fee simple? What control does Caltrans actually have about the width of the road and where people should not be parking? because there isn't any more room. There are parts north and south of town where the white line is not feet but inches to the bluff edge. And there's no way that they're going to put a barrier there. There's nowhere to put the barrier unless they're going to go down 130 feet to the water's edge. So it's, and I think Caltrans would agree, Phil might agree, the Highway Patrol would agree that they're getting more and more traffic on the highway. The county doesn't help by bringing in filmmakers. Need for Speed, if you've seen it, it makes a joke out of anything we're trying to do on Highway 1 for safety. The next film will be Fast and Furious. Television ads are based on erratic, stupid driving. People respond to those ads, they come up here and they drive the same way. I would hope that the Highway Patrol has some comment. Caltrans today has some comment. I've asked Lauren Rex of State Parks to be here. He's in the state of Washington today, although he did speak with Nash Gonzalez, your county's planning director, interim. Hopefully we've stirred it up, and be assured we'll keep it up. Thank you.
Okay, we have engineering from Caltrans, and also I see someone from Highway Patrol. I don't know if you can, either or both of you could add some comments on observations about elk and maybe addressing some of the issues that.
I would say if the Highway Patrol would make a comment is that Captain Carpenter is well aware. He attends our town meetings, and in the January 17th town meeting this year, after Sheriff Ullman spoke, this issue was next on the agenda. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Darren Hill, Caltrans Traffic Safety. We have shot the speed zone through this area. We have looked at the collisions the last 10 years. The last 3 we have had no collisions, so good news. We have looked at radar feedback signs, and we have a work order that's issued to put a radar feedback sign for southbound just to the south of the school. The school is open. I understand it to be open for preschool, so we are putting a radar feedback sign there. We currently have an emergency project there to fix the culvert just to the north of the school, if you're familiar with Elk and where the Greenwood School is. We were losing roadway. We're repairing that. They're jacking in a new culvert, which should be done in approximately 3 weeks. When we get done with that, we will be widening and putting a 4-foot shoulder for southbound, hopefully for northbound as well. We have a standing policy of repairing, replacing, maintaining ADA ramps at intersections. If we do a paving job, we have to go back and bring those up to current standard. We do not have a policy for putting in sidewalk. That is something that is done under permit or by another agency, a city, a county, that is coming in and changing the rural nature of the roadway to a more urban environment. But we do not generally do that. Sidewalk comes with a whole list of criteria that are challenging to meet and can create a maintenance, a significant maintenance effort into perpetuity. A shoulder provides a lot more opportunities for all modes of transportation. Pedestrians can use a shoulder, bikes can use a shoulder. If you have a sidewalk, bikes have to stay on the roadway, not on the sidewalk. And there's a requirement that if you have a bike lane there, it has to be 5 feet wide if it's a raised sidewalk. If we put in a 4 or 5 foot wide shoulder, that provides for bikes and peds to both use the same facility. It allows for errant vehicles to run off the road and recover, and it allows for disabled vehicles to have someplace to pull off the road. So from those standpoints, we would prefer to have a shoulder versus a raised sidewalk. That being said, we don't have a provision for building one in the future. So if the board wants to look at putting in a sidewalk, then we need to have a funding mechanism to do so. And I throw that out there. The other thing that has to be considered is where is the property coming from? Caltrans 1982 built the shoulder on the west side of the road. I've got the as-built plan sheet south of the post office. So that shoulder has been in there for a number of decades at this point. And it is used extensively for parking. We don't have a problem with that. The ADT is 1,000 cars a day. So it's low enough volumes that there are large gaps between vehicles coming through. It allows for people to leisurely park, look both ways, and cross the road wherever they park to wherever they're going. Generally, it's at the big dirt turnout parking area, but it can be anywhere along the road. Currently, there are a number of workers that are parking on both sides of the road and walking back and forth to their vehicles to where they're working, and they do so safely every day. So I think that a number of people would appreciate being able to park in front of their business or house as it currently stands. If the community of Elk desperately wants to go with sidewalk, they need to decide through some type of a plan and give us a direction of whose property we're going to take or whose parking we're going to take to build that. And that's where we're at. We have put in the signs, and we'll continue to look at signage. And we have a work order put in a radar feedback sign, which should book in the main portion of Elk.
So, Darren, one of the issues that former Supervisor Norm Duvall brought up was the northbound feedback sign.
Yes,
And
I was the RE for that back in 2008 when we put it in.
okay, so I don't know if you heard that suggestion before, but I gather his suggestion was, what if it was moved rather than when vehicles are going up the hill, which they would presumably drive a little slower up the hill anyway, to maybe push it a little farther north where they're traveling at a level where they might be at that point accelerating.
Right. We have looked at it. It's a hardwired in system, so it's a substantial change. Not that we can't do it, and not that we aren't looking at it, but it's going to be a project to move it at this point.
Okay, so that's something you're considering?
Yeah, it's still something we're considering. But like I said, it's hardwired in. Most of the radar feedbacks at this point we put in are solar powered. So they're a little easier to move around. That was a hardwired system. So if we do that, which we are considering, it may be a few years to get it moved up because of the conduits and whatnot.
So something else that I brought up during the discussion on the FILO was I think you have some discretion on how close you paint the white line to the center line.
It's already 11 feet.
Okay, that's pretty much your minimum is 11, because it's
Yeah.
like 12 and is more
Correct.
your standard.
12 is standard. We're already down on the width.
Okay, all right.
So.
Because I didn't know that visually narrowing the travel lane does
Yeah.
tend to cause people to slow down just a little
Right.
bit.
And people are doing, I shot the speed zone 2006, January, February. People are doing 33 miles an hour in the 30 mile an hour zone. Once they get up to the school area, they're doing 34 to 35 miles an hour. Once they go through the S curves and they're up by there's a field to the west and there's a bed and breakfast to the right that they've been working on for years, that's where they're doing 41 miles an hour. But when they get through the actual community of Elk, they're 31 to 33 miles an hour. So is the consistent speed.
Any questions from board members?
Couple things.
Sure.
I heard the mention of the 4-foot shoulder, and then I heard mention of a place where people can safely pull off in an emergency.
Uh-huh.
That seems to be incompatible to me.
Okay. 4-foot shoulders is our standard for 1,000 vehicles a day. 4 foot is the paved portion. You also have a 3-foot, what's called a choker or hinge point that's graveled. So that's now 7 feet wide.
Okay.
So we can't use that for pedestrians or bikes because, you know, you walk on a gravel shoulder, or ride your bike on a gravel shoulder, it's not as easy. But that would give you that 7 feet wide.
Okay,
That's all.
Okay, it makes sense. The second thing is a little bit off on a tangent. So you did mention something that is probably the one issue I have the biggest, be in my boxers about for how the law reads versus what makes sense. And that's this requirement that ADA ramps be upgraded when work is done on a highway adjacent to them. And that is apparently a requirement in lieu of spending the same money on additional ADA ramps elsewhere or other things that the public would see as more important. And that makes me a little nuts. So I'm going to try and change that law because it's a waste of public's money
Well,
as I see it right now. So.
I mean, that's our policy, so.
Well,
Perhaps I missed it, but did you mention the total width of the right-of-way, Caltrans right-of-way?
It's various. We have prescriptive and we have in-fee. And so it just
From
depends on,
What to what?
well, prescriptive means we only maintain from the edge to edge. We go out just to the south of the old post office. It goes from center line out 25 feet to the west. So to the east, it's prescriptive. So it really depends on exactly where you're asking in Elk.
So when you say prescriptive, you mean from the center line 11 feet and then anything additional is prescriptive?
No,
or-
prescriptive means that we maintain the asphalt and the shoulder to a set point. And it's we don't own it, we maintain it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So
But
I mean,
you don't have, it's not important. Actually, I can look at this.
well, that that
Rex
won't
can
have
show me this
the
drawing.
right of way on it though.
It doesn't have the actual right of way,
Yeah.
but
So if on Highway 1, where you see a barbed wire fence on either side, we maintain anything inside that barbed wire fence, but that's not actually ours. If we wanted to widen the shoulder at that point, we would go to the property owner of whoever owned adjacent to the highway, and we would buy that right of way to build that 4-foot shoulder, and then a ditch line, whatever it is. Until we change it, we maintain it anyway, because it's our ditch, it's the fence line.
it's prescriptive is sort of like the historical footprint.
Right.
The highway was there before the state was buying property for it. If we do a new project that includes, any kind of modernization, basically beyond maintenance, we would buy property, and that's why it's sort of piecemeal. Where we've done those kinds of improvements, we've purchased right of way. Other places we simply maintain the historical footprint.
Right.
If I could just add, I think you covered it very well, Darren, in terms of the technical aspects of what's out there. It's a big challenge for everyone when the state highway is also a main street. It's one of the things that we struggle with and that we try to balance the uses. In this case, we have what we sometimes refer to as a multi-use shoulder that is for all modes, bicycles, pedestrians. It's also used in some cases for parking where there's space to do it. And it's a challenge because you're balancing the uses of local traffic, of interregional traffic that's moving through the community that may or may not have any interest in stopping or doing business there, and of people that are coming, as Mr. Duvall mentioned, for tourism purposes, and all of them have their own
Needs.
interests and needs in terms of moving around. So the balancing of the main street and the use of the street as a community area, it's always a challenge to balance those kinds of uses with a state highway, you know, which serves that other purpose of traffic, moving traffic. But yeah, I think Darren and I are both available for. I heard Mr. Duvall's statement, frustration at the overall situation, possibly conflicts between motorized travelers and non-motorized travelers, difficulty with that, and the increase of all kinds of traffic. But I didn't hear a specific request like we need to put sidewalks in any particular location. It sounded like a more general frustration with those conflicts.
I can make a comment.
Well, could you hold it? And I'd like to have I would like to actually have Highway Patrol speak if you're available to speak first.
Good afternoon. I'm Sergeant Eric Parsh out of the Ukiah area CHP. As everybody may or may not be aware, so first of all, my commander, Bruce Carpenter, and the sergeant that actually handles our coast section, Sergeant Kedron Emery, are unavailable. They're both out of the county. I spoke with Sergeant Emery yesterday regarding this issue, as we knew we were going to be coming out here today to speak with you folks. As far as how we staff our coast, so if we had a maximum staffing, there would be 6 officers out on the coast. 4 of those officers would handle what we call the North Coast, which is basically from Albion north. And then there would be 2 officers for the South Coast. Obviously, it's a little bit slower down there. Unfortunately, with the way the staffing has allowed for about the last how many ever years now, we only have 1 officer on the South Coast, which obviously that cuts into a lot of the patrol and a lot of our visibility that we can be out there, because basically about three days each week we don't have an officer that's even on the highway down there. We will have a lot of times one of the North Coast officers that'll get down there depending on their call volume and their load to check that area. And then of course we have 1 supervisor that's over there, but again that supervisor is up on the North Coast. So unfortunately, when you talk about elk, we have 1 officer that is available, but it's generally right now it's Wednesday through Saturday, which doesn't mean that we can't send other people down there. I know my commander's made a big push. He tried with the last 2 cadets we got out of the academy to get one of them assigned to that 2nd position on the South Coast. He's been in contact with Mr. Duvall, and obviously, as Mr. Duvall had related, he goes to all the town meetings and such, and so does our sergeant out there, Kedron Emery. She's also at those. They're aware of them wanting more enforcement, especially with the summertime coming. So we're looking at different things. We were initially going to put an officer from our area over here out there. Unfortunately, we had to pull that back because we've had several officers that were off on injury status. And so when we have that type of thing, we have to make sure that our staffing level here at the area for 101 and 20 and 128 and 253 and 175 and such is at a certain level. So we weren't able to do that. We're still pushing. I know we're expected to get 2 more officers in June. He again asked that one of them be assigned to the coast, and we haven't heard back on that yet. So if we get that position, that officer would still be required to spend about 4 months at the Ukiah area for training. If and when they were to make it off a break-in, then that officer would be assigned to the South Coast. So Captain Carpenter's well aware of the complaints from the citizens down there. Again, he'll continue to attend the meetings. And with Mr. Duvall talking about the issues through there, and now that Sergeant Emery is also aware, we're going to try and get more people down there as staffing allows. But unfortunately, when it comes to things like that, because if the accident picture isn't there and some of the things aren't there, we have to put our resources where we have the majority of our problems or the majority of our traffic. And unfortunately, elk is a little farther out on the priority list for things as far as that goes. But I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you guys have about anything, or if anybody has any other suggestions. I know Mr. Duvall's been in touch with Captain Carpenter, and I know he's going to, try to dedicate some attention to elk, so that we can hopefully, help ease some of those, especially with the summertime coming. So, yes, sir.
Thank you, and you may have answered the question, but even with your staffing issues, it would seem like, if the commander wanted to assign an officer or two to do some targeted enforcement on a particular day, and maybe that means pulling someone from Ukiah, but simply spending a day in elk, where they can observe.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people do fly through there, just like.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's something I'll bring back to him. Like I say, if there's some suggestions from the board or that they want us to look at, I'm more than happy to bring back those to him. And that's definitely one. That's what we'll normally do. We call them at the area, we have traffic complaints. So if a citizen calls in and says, hey, here off of, here out in Redwood Valley during these school times in the afternoon, we got kids that are flying through here at this between the hours of 3 and 5 on this road, then we have traffic complaints that we'll go out and work over the next month to 2 months, where we'll send an officer to sit out there for an hour or two during those times the citizens are complaining about, to be visual and also to see if we can find some of those individuals. And so that's something we can do with elk too. If we get something, Sergeant Kedron Emery, who handles the coast, if I can get Mr. Duvall in touch with her, and he can say, hey, it's coming up on a weekend, it'd sure be nice maybe during these kind of peak times. I'm not sure what those are out there, because unfortunately I'm fairly new to the area. We can get an officer down there to, sit there and not only be visual, but hopefully write some tickets and maybe at least contact some people, let them know, hey, whether they're walking on the road, whether they're riding bikes, just about the safety and the issues that we're having, so that, because ultimately we don't want to see anybody injured or hurt or anything like that, obviously, out there. And, if there's something we can do to help, we're more than happy to do that.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Sometimes cities will have a radar detector loop that's movable to different neighborhoods that tells people, hey, your speed is this, and they can see that they're going over the speed limit.
Yes.
And I think some of those devices will also have cameras built in, so they can record. Not that they're going to go back and give a ticket a week later to someone who drove through, but at least they can kind of identify when are people driving through the neighborhood, when are the peak hours, and when are the. Cause sometimes those things they'll pick up. Oh, it's the same driver comes in at 5:20 every day from work, and is racing through the neighborhood. So, do you have any device like that that you could
that's
position?
Something I can check with Northern Division. Our division is based out of Reading. Unfortunately, a lot of the what I call the neat devices like that are more specific to cities and stuff where there's a little bit more money, because we are the state, and because we're a little over 7,000 of us statewide. Generally, every office has a trailer, but when you talk about providing the updated trailers, like most of our radar trailers are a little bit older, so they just shoot the speed. They don't have any of the high-tech stuff that some of the new things, where if you're in a city where you have a smaller department of, say, maybe 30 officers or 50 officers, and it's a big city, they're able to purchase stuff like that. When you talk about getting it for the state, unless certain funds become available that they're able to get those, we're generally behind on that kind of technology. I mean, even though we are the state, we usually are a little behind the curve on getting some of the newer items. But I'll definitely check through our division, see if they have that stuff available, because if they do, they will loan it out to the areas. But it would have to come from there. I know we have a radar trailer. I know Clear Lake area in Lake County has a radar trailer, but they're both the older type that basically you just set them up, they shoot speed, and they don't do anything else.
Because it does seem sort of cost effective to identify when those peak hours are.
Yeah. So,
any other questions? Okay, Norman, do you want to come back up?
I'm sorry we don't have more detail relative to specifics about width here, distance there, how many feet. But I would like to ask that you put this on your agenda a year from now, so we can come back and see how we've all done. And next time around, I'll be able to put some visuals up on the wall that will show you the number of vehicles that have to cross the double line into the oncoming lane in order to get by. If a resident who has a hedge in front of his house wants to get out of the driver's side of the truck, we do have one photograph of a missing door where a lumber truck didn't even know he hit the truck, didn't know that he had hit a one-ton pickup. The door went away. The trucker kept on going. It was followed by a resident that finally flagged the guy down. I don't know about the paperwork of that. But if we could come back in a year from now, we'll be able to see how the town is reacting. Hopefully the construction projects will be slowed down. We'll have a huge increase in number of visitors. Specific to the time to hang out in Elk, northbound is between 3:30 and 6 in the afternoons, evenings. And of course, it's an industrial highway. The vast majority of people who speed are employees who are working on the South Coast, heading back to Fort Bragg. And then the weekend traffic that is out having a good time, like they showed how to do that in the film that the county subscribed to and endorsed and supported. Thank you.
I'd like to ask a question, Matt. I'm more interested in the infrastructure part of the issue than the enforcement issue. Is there some folks that can put together a wish list of what you think makes sense as far as infrastructure goes, so we can start looking at what, who owns what for, adding?
I think that would be very helpful, and it would. I don't know who would have such a survey to show what is prescriptive and what is fee. Anybody who wants a property split has to have the 25-foot setback, which is right adjacent to my property. So between my property and all past the post office, all the way past the art center to the garage, has a setback. The garage does not. So it's in some areas it works. To have the portable radar feedback there would be significant. Whether it recorded it or not, I think it would be significant. If you need a place to put a radar sign or to park a something on a trailer, I'm sure there are any number of volunteers, property owners, that would say, please put it right here. So the water line is following right outside of the white line. So it's, and again, it's very narrow. Right where Lifu Gulch is, a vehicle parked there, there isn't any passageway walking north or south except in the highway. So I'll try to get what information I can in the way of a survey to show which properties are set back, which are not, and where maybe parking should not be prohibited, and other areas where it should be encouraged. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's good?
Okay, we'll go back to MCOG staff.
And with my question, can we be here a year from now?
I'm not guaranteeing I'm going to be here a year from now.
Well,
It's up to the board to make that determination, but what I was going to say is that I will, as I said a few months ago, I will continue to be in contact with not only the CHP but also Caltrans. You heard Darren say that we are planning on relocating the radar feedback signs, see what kind of difference that makes, and see if there's anything that can be done with more frequent visits by the CHP as far as speed control. The real issue of who parks and where is a problem doesn't just exist in Elk, happens on many rural areas where you just can't put up a no parking sign because once again, you don't have anybody to enforce it. And probably the problem was a little bit worse in Elk than other small communities, because at least even in Westport, there's a side street where people can park on it, and you don't even have that in Elk. And so you have some conflicting uses. And one other thing that kind of could complicate things, that I'm surprised nobody has brought up, is the coastal zone. And whatever you do there has to be consistent with the Coastal Act. And typically they don't like any shoulders more than 4 feet wide. And so there's a bunch of issues here. Having dealt with similar kind of complaints down in Wallala, where because of some new improvements that are going to be made, it's going to eliminate some parking, and people are concerned about parking, and we've gone back and forth for years about off-street parking, but the problem is who's going to pay for it, whose property is going to be on, and who's going to maintain it. I mean, that is part of the issue is tourist parking as well as construction parking, at least temporarily, and other people who want to access some of the businesses in the community. So it's a real problem, and I don't have an answer regarding the parking issue. Like I said, I've dealt with this in Wallala for years without any real resolution as far as providing any off-street parking. And I know that's part of the problem that has been identified. You heard Caltrans explain, you have a limited amount of shoulder use, and there's people with vehicles trying to park, and then occasionally some pedestrians, occasionally some bicyclists, and they're all competing for the same limited space in what is largely, I would assume, prescriptive right-of-way. So that is not your answer whether it's going to be back to the board in a year. That's kind of up to the chairman and the board.
Seems to be a reasonable request to put it on the agenda.
I'll move that, yeah.
So looks like we've got agreement to put it on the agenda a year from now in May. So
Thank you very much. Thank you. And also thank you to the agencies that have spoken and have become more aware of the situation there. And we'll come back with the visuals that were described this morning. Thank you.
okay, all right. Well, thank you all, and we'll go now into our annual budget presentation.
Sure. There's a lot of information
Wipe up the scrapings there.
Well, let me introduce this real quick. While Janet is sifting through her notes and papers, what we have been doing for many years is at our May meeting, we do a budget workshop to go crunch through all the numbers to make sure everybody has understanding of the way that our yearly budget is developed through all the different programs, the funding sources, and also the different types of allocations. We found it to be helpful so that any questions you may have, the board may have, we have different boards just about every year, can understand how we put the budget together and ask the questions at this time. So hopefully all the questions you have can be resolved either today or quickly afterwards if it's something complex, and that we can move forward with presenting you our budget at the June meeting, and it won't be take up that much of your time in June. So are you ready? Did I stall good enough?
I'm ready.
All right.
Good afternoon, everyone. So yes, we'd like to have this workshop to just refresh the continuing members, orient the new members. Some of you were on the committees that made some of these recommendations, so it will be familiar to you. So of course, no action today. We're just going to get you acquainted with the material. I hope the visuals help make the budget a little easier to follow. This presentation can take about 45 minutes with all the material we're covering. I hope you'll bear with us on that, and feel free to stop me with questions anytime, but I'm just going to plow on through otherwise and keep it moving along. So, and also just note that our independent CPA auditor thinks it's a good idea that we cover all this material with you at least once a year, because we're not bringing you regular financial statements to look at. So we just thought that was a good idea. So, yeah, there's a new feature on 101 that we have I thought was kind of interesting. Nothing to do with the budget. Just okay, so in your packet, you have my written report of the recommendations from your staff and the committees. The slides today are mostly going to cover the TDA funding. That's the Transportation Development Act, that first line there. I do want to cover kind of a broad range that doesn't follow exactly your agenda, but I'll let you know when we come to the agenda items. And Loretta will report on the planning program when we come to that and add some comments. You've got her written report in your packet as well. And I'll ask Phil to talk a little bit about how we've been using these RSTP funds. I'll describe that in a minute, and some other issues on the way. So, and towards the end of today's presentation, I'd like to summarize where some of our transportation funding is coming from, just to place these numbers into a larger context and point to what's going on with transportation in California and the nation. There have been some legislative changes and things to do with our funding stream. So there at the top of the screen there, that's the Transportation Development Act. We call it TDA. And that governs two of our funding sources. In fact, it just governs two funding sources. It's a local transportation fund that comes from the quarter-cent sales tax that goes entirely to transportation, to every county in California. And the state transit assistance, that's also a state fund, and I'll talk about that more when we come to it. The planning, transportation planning overall work program, we call it the OWP, has a little bit of the LTF sales tax money, and then also a variety, several other state funding sources in that program. The Regional Surface Transportation Program originates as federal money. We usually exchange that for state funds. I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get there. And this is just to show you in your packet, there's a summary page that's a snapshot of the whole budget. You don't have that green highlight. That's just to show you where we'll be looking today, mostly those columns under the local funding sources. We'll be focusing on that. This is the other format that I provide. I call it the supplemental format, 3 pages. It's got, it itemizes the funds in some more detail, compares to the previous year, and adds some line item notes. I did not manage to get that done for you today. I think we can manage, but you will have that in your final budget next month. Okay, and also in your packet, you've got the explanatory notes on funding sources. I've freshly updated those, detailing where the funds originate, their allowable uses, how MCOG has used those over the past decade or so. And so if you're all with me and identified all those items in your packet, I'll start at the top with the local transportation funds. So this is just to show you a trend over the past 20 years. And you can see they've gradually been rising from the sales tax revenues. The first time we reached 2 million was back in 97-98 fiscal year. And then you see that drop in the middle, that dip there. That was a Great Recession. And we, resulting from the global economic crisis of 2008, it took a year or so to impact our budget, but you can see that drop and then a gradual climb back up. So it has taken us a good 7 years to return to the $3.2 million level of those sales tax revenues. So we got back to that fund estimate, and we're looking at budgets, not the actuals. Hold on a second. I think no. We are showing actual deposits up until this latest fund estimate. So in 2015-16 and 16-17, it was up at 3.4 million, and the new estimate is approaching just about at 3.5 million. So you'll notice there's a little spike up there, the tail end of that green line of revenues. That is the result of a transition to our county auditor's modified accrual method of accounting for the revenues. And we had to do that this year and get on the same page with how county was counting them. And that resulted in 14 months of revenue during the audited fiscal year of 2015-16. That's the audit we just completed that you accepted a month or two ago. And so there is a spike, but what that's doing is giving us 2 months of unallocated revenue. We'll be talking about that a little more as we go. There's almost $600,000 there that's going into the 2017-18 budget. So that's available in addition to the new auditor's estimate. So the committee recommendations all agree to allocate a portion of that unallocated balance in this budget, but to reserve most of it, temporarily at least, until the unmet transit needs have been considered, and that's part of our budget findings. So the most recent audit in 15-16 confirmed a shortfall of sales tax revenues. We were short about $65,000. So this unallocated balance of 2 months of revenue and this one-time transition was kind of softening that impact and allowing us to backfill our reserve and maintain the annual allocation to MTA as the executive committee is recommending. So for the current year, the year we're in right now, 16-17, the auditor is predicting an excess above the budget, and that would flow into next year, 18-19. We'll get into that a little more later. So you'll notice that the red line is the allocations. It doesn't exactly follow, and sometimes it's above the budget estimate, and that's because we're looking at using those prior year revenues when we had an excess, and those go into a following year. So, but it generally follows along. Okay, so I went the wrong direction, sorry. So the state transit assistance looks a little different. It's kind of all over the map there. This used to be derived from the sales tax on gasoline and was based on the price of fuel, and that's where we get that big spike in the middle there when gas prices were up. So about 6 years ago, the state changed that formula, and that was called the gas tax swap. And since then, the revenues have leveled off to between $400,000 and $500,000, but lately they've been dropping again. So they've been coming down to about $300,000 level. So that drop is attributed to a change in the state's allocation policy. And I haven't had time to really study up on that, but the Cliff Notes version is that Senate Bill 838 was recently passed into law, and that placed a moratorium on that change to stabilize funding for transit out of this fund here. And there is a proposed Assembly Bill 1113 that is to restore the long-standing STA allocation method that was in use and increase revenues for transit to the previous levels. So it should go back to where we were. The preliminary estimate for this budget year, 17-18, is $355,000. And that fund can be used for capital, transit capital purposes or operations. There's been some legislation around that, how that can be done. There's a new bill, Senate Bill 508, that went into effect last July 2016. It allows more flexibility So transit agencies can be proportionately eligible for using it for operations to the degree they meet certain efficiency standards. So it's not just yes, no on eligibility for operations. So MTA now can claim this fund for both capital and operations purposes. And that's important to them. And they are the only claimant we have on this fund in the county. Okay, so the final step in determining the available revenues from the local transportation funds, the sales tax, is to set the reserve balance. So we're always looking at this 3-year window. You've got the last audited fiscal year to see if you have any excess revenue or not, and we wait to find that out before we spend that money. Then the year we're in right now, when we're preparing the next budget, set the reserve balance, and then for the next budget, the one we're doing, we'll decide if, depending on the reserve balance, is there any more in the fund left over from the prior year or not that would flow into this new budget? Or a shortfall. In this case, here we are, looking at 2017-18 budget. We had a shortfall in the last audited year. So as I said, that was about $65,000. Not a lot, but it kind of makes a difference based on our county auditor's report of 12 months on the accrual basis. So in this case, we had that shortfall, so we used that reserve fund to cover that shortfall, and that's what it's intended for. That's one of the primary uses of that reserve fund. So currently, now we are actually on item 6A on your agenda is a report of the current year-to-date revenues. And the, we've got 8 months, we're 8 months in, and we're running about $167,000 above the budget, so about 7% over, but we still have 4 more months to go. The county auditor's projection that they did in February is looking at an excess revenue of $102,000. So hopefully this will hold. We'd like it to hold. We'll just have to wait and see. A lot can happen in the next 4 months. So now that brings us to the next item on your agenda, 6B. Is the executive committee recommendations. They met in January and in February to look at budget matters. And so this is the first thing they look at for fiscal year 17-18, this budget. The committee recommends fully funding the reserve, but that means taking $68,000 of that unallocated balance I was talking about to backfill this reserve, bring it up to the full 5% according to your policy. So that was their first recommendation. The policy is to set the balance at 5% of the auditor's new estimate of revenues, or $100,000, whichever is larger, and it's in this case it's $175,000 rounded to the nearest thousand, as we do. So this will be the 3rd year of a fully restored policy. There were those years we were climbing back out from the recession and either waiving that reserve policy or just partially funding the reserve to 2 or 3%. Now we've been at the full 5% for, this would be the 3rd year now under the new budget. So it took 6 years to restore that fund during the recession. So when this budget line is approved, we know all the available TDA revenues, and that's the end of the discussion of budget revenues. Any questions on revenue stuff? Looks like you're all hanging in there with me. Thank you. Okay, so that brings us to the allocation side. And these are the established priorities consistent with Transportation Development Act. Administration comes off the top. And after that, the remainder of the auditors, the county auditor's estimate, that's what we have to use. This is estimate for the year of sales tax revenues. 2% can be allocated to bicycle and pedestrian facilities. That's optional. allocations to the planning work program, and finally, most of it goes to transit, which is MTA is the only claimant in this case. The use of our operations, the senior center contracts, which are subsidized for assisted transportation and for their capital plan too. So this chart shows you the trend of the allocation. So it closely follows what you saw with revenues. You had a sharp drop right after the economic crash, pulling out of the recession there. This is how the allocations have looked over the past 9 years. These numbers in this chart are based on the budget, not on the actuals. We looked at the audit for the actuals. You can see most of it's going to transit. Those tall purple bars, that's mostly the transit funding. And the first few layers down there are MTA's programs. So the administration at the bottom there, the slice of the 2% for bike and pedestrian, and then that bright green bar is for the planning program. And the planning number includes some carryover, so that kind of rises and falls, probably change again for this coming year. So all of those, that bottom geologic layer there has been running around 500, 600,000 for MCOG's purposes. And everything else goes to MTA for transit. So anyway, you can see it's kind of leveled off. We've been gradually building back fiscal health since 2010. And other than that, it's pretty level. What was my last note? There are unallocated funds again that would remain in reserve. We'll get back to that in a minute. So moving on, we'll just take these one at a time. This is continuing on your agenda item 6B. The executive committee looked at the administration proposal, and here's that 3-year window breakdown just to compare. The line at the bottom, percent of the budget, I'll just note that running about 10 or 11%. That's relative to the total LTF sales tax revenues, not all sources. If we were to look at the total revenues of about $6 million in this budget that we oversee, administration's about 7%. So we think that's a reasonable range. Looking back a little earlier than this, just to summarize, allocations to administration were level for 4 years in a row, with the last increase less than 2% in fiscal year 10-11. But then in 2014, we had a restructuring. You went out to bid for the staffing contracts, and so there was a built-in loss of efficiency by separating administration and planning functions into 2 separate staffing services contracts. So administration costs were expected to rise at that point. They kind of leveled off now. And so the contract's set for 5 years. The budget year we're going into will be year 4. And those are indexed to the CPI rate of inflation. And that's been pretty low. The new budget year we're looking at is going to add a cost of living increase, COLA, at 2.26%, so about 2.25%, and that's about $8,000 to the administration staffing contract. And as far as the direct costs, that second line, that's not costs that the Dow contract has access to. That's, well, we do actually use it for some certain travel and a few things we can use, web hosting and certain direct costs like that, but it's also available to the board for taking trips and education, things like that. So, but that's separate from the contract. So in this coming year, we've actually reduced the direct costs budget from new money. It's a higher number there, and that's just because the executive committee recommended reallocating an old balance of $18,000 or so as we've proposed, and there are actually some cost savings. That was resulting from some cost savings back in 14-15 when we had that transition between the contracts. There were some savings there. So in any case, that increase, that $18,000 accounts for more than half of this proposed overall increase. So it does look like The administration budget's higher. It does have a little carryover in it, so it's not as high as it looks. That's the story on admin. Continuing on with the committee recommendations, the bike and pedestrian allocation is optional up to 2%, as I've mentioned, the auditor's estimate for funding. As far as I know, we've only opted out 1 year, and that was after that economic downturn when we had to really scrape up some money, and cuts were everywhere. But ever since then, this council has chosen to allocate the 2%. It's not a whole lot of money, but it does help to leverage other state and federal grants, and it's often used as a local match. So it does make a difference to our member agencies that use that money. You'll see, so it runs about $60,000 a year. We're right in there. There's a fund balance that's running around $300,000, and what that represents is unclaimed funds that already been awarded, but those are incomplete projects. We're waiting for those claims. They're works in progress. And that fund balance has been coming down. We were a little concerned about that for a while, that maybe it was taking too long for our member agencies to spend that money. Well, they've been turning in their projects, getting those done, so it's coming down. That's actually what we would like to see. So anything else on that? Oh, May is National Bike Month, right? So I looked it up. Bike to Work Day is May 19th. There's actually Bike to Work Week, May 15th to the 19th. I don't know if anyone's biking to work. I can't do it myself, but maybe around here. It's sponsored by the League of American Bicyclists, and they started in 1880. Did you know that? That's kind of impressive, I thought. And they started this bike month in 1956, so it's been going on. I don't know if there are any events in Mendocino County. Have anybody heard any? I haven't. But there are some active bike groups in the county. I know they're busy doing things. I'm just going to take a sip of water here. Now we're on planning. This brings you to 6C on your agenda, and that's the Technical Advisory Committee recommendations. They're the ones that advise on the planning program. So historically, the planning allocations have been level at $100,000 a year of new funding. This year, the Executive Committee and the Technical Advisory Committee, the TAC, both propose $122,750. That's the first increase in many, many years. And the reason for that is primarily due to the way Caltrans is constraining the allowable uses of the state planning funds that we get, that we depend on in our planning program. And they're keeping a more watchful eye on that now, and limiting what we can do with those. So we really do need these local funds for flexibility. It's very important to the program. So you'll see there's a carryover number that was over 100,000. It's coming down, gradually spending that down. But we'll definitely see a rise with the First Amendment in the fiscal year. You typically will come to you with an amendment for the planning program, and Loretta can tell you how that works. We have to wait till the end of the year to see what projects fund balances have. So even with an increase in the funding, the percentage of the total budget is actually down. We're down to 3.5%, and that's probably because we've got, again, some unallocated funds that are adding to our total budget. So one more slide on this. I'll turn it over to Loretta. This is just a snapshot of what the work program looks like right now in the draft proposal. We've got a number of work elements. MCOG has some, Ukiah, the Fort Bragg, the county, MTA all have some things in there. So this is about 600,000. We know this will go up. Typically the planning program's well over $1 million. We expect to see more carryover. So Loretta, would you like to come up and talk about this at all? And then we'll come back and talk about the other funds.
Just
So Loretta Ellard oversees this planning program.
Good afternoon. I have a staff report for you in your packet, number 6C, that lists this year's draft work program. There are 17 proposed work elements, 12 of which are administered by MCOG staff and 5 from local agency requests. This year's work program will be somewhat different than in the past, in that in the past we had what the state referred to as a mega work element for much of our MCOG staff work. It was work element 1. And then last year we combined work element 1 and 2 and made it more of a mega work element. And so this year they've asked us to separate it out. So I have 4 new, actually 4 work elements instead of 1 for the main MCOG staff duties. So if you have your staff report, I'd like to just briefly mention each work element, and feel free to stop me if you have any questions on each one. I'll go through them rather quickly. And I just want to say, as Janet mentioned, when you see the final in June, it will be significantly higher than this $625,000. I did put a placeholder in for the carryover amount on work element 22, the Safe Routes to School, but that's a very large 3-year grant, and that carryover amount's, it's going to go up several $100,000. It's just too early in the year. It's too far away from the end of the fiscal year closing to really estimate what that's going to be. So when you see the final next month, it'll have our best guess estimate for you to approve in June. But once the fiscal year ends in June 30th, then we will have the actual amounts, and we'll come back to you within a couple months for the First Amendment, which we typically do every year to actually make those estimated carryovers into actual carryovers. So going through the staff report, I want to mention that staff attended a Caltrans audit training in January, and we received new information which we feel is new interpretations of things. The rules haven't changed, but the staff that's reviewing our work, their interpretations have changed, and they've tightened up on what they say we can legally use the Rural Planning Assistance, the RPA funds for. So, for example, a meeting that I'm in right now, they do not want that billed to RPA because it's not technically planning, it's more administrative. So things like that, agenda preparation, TAC meeting, there's certain things that they are being a little bit strict on, and they want this funded with LTF. That's why we need a little bit more LTF in this budget. So let's see. Okay, so just going through the work elements. Work element 1 is our typical regional government and intergovernmental coordination element. However, we've revised it to leave work element 1 as the RPA eligible duties. And then work element 2, it's similar duties. It has a different title, planning, management, and general coordination. It will include the day-to-day work that may not be RPA eligible, and it'll be funded with LTF. Work element 3 is the new work element, community transportation planning, which we've separated out those duties that have to do with coordinating and outreaching to local communities and all the various plans that you've seen us come to you over the years, from the Laytonville plan to the Wallala plan, the Point Arena plan, the Westport plan, all those plans that we've done. At the time, they were performed under a grant, but now that those grants are long gone, we still have ongoing coordination with those communities to apply for infrastructure funds, grant funds, and to just continue supporting them and helping them get their needs met. So that's a new work element. Work element 4, sustainable transportation planning. This topic we're seeing more and more every week with new grant opportunities, new requirements related to SB 375 and AB 32 to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and things like that, things related to the Strategic Growth Council. So we've separated out those duties into a new work element 4. Work element 5 is a request from the City of Ukiah to prepare a comprehensive ADA access plan update. That's pretty straightforward. Work element 6 is the County Department of Transportation's annual work element to perform special studies. Work element 7 is MCOG staff annual planning, programming, and monitoring work element that has to do with duties most related to the RTIP and the STIP and other related duties, along with some direct costs for the pavement management program. Work element 8 is a new small work element public participation plan to update MCOG's 2008 public participation plan to be consistent with the current federal transportation bill. Work element 9 is a request from the city of Fort Bragg to do a street safety plan. A street safety plan. It's an update of their current residential street safety plan, but they've retitled it and they've broadened the document. Work element 10 is a carryover project to update our regional transportation plan. So in addition to it being a carryover, it includes additional new funding in the 17-18 year. Work element 11 is a request from the city of Ukiah to do a traffic analysis for the realignment of Talmadge Road. Work element 12 is our annual training work element. The difference this year is we've actually, in addition, it previously included money for direct costs to attend trainings, but we've added some funding for staff time to attend the trainings. Otherwise, we have to bill that staff time to somewhere else, so it just makes sense to separate it out. Work element 15 is a request from MTA to do phase 4 of their bus stop review. It's the 4th and final phase of a 4-phase project. They have not yet initiated phase 3, which is in the current program. So the TAC supported MTA's request. I think someone suggested at the meeting that it'd be more efficient, since they haven't started phase 3, to go ahead and combine both phases, carry over phase 3. Work element 16 is an annual multimodal transportation planning work element. This has to do with bike ped transit rail and any multimodal type activities, attending MTA meetings, NCRA meetings, bike and ped duties. Work element 18 is the standard geographic information system activities, GIS work element, to provide GIS support services for the various projects that we work on. Work element 20 is an annual grant development and assistant work element. We help all local agencies with grant requests, and we stay apprised of grant opportunities and things of that nature. Work element 22 is a multi-year Safe Routes to School active transportation program non-infrastructure grant. It's being carried over again. And finally, this work program, we're proposing to reserve $37,275 in the Rural Planning Assistance Funds. The reason being is we have not yet identified a need for it. There are allowed carryover provisions that allow us to carry over a portion of our RPA funds every year. So at this point, the TAC could discuss in our May meeting coming up with a project for those funds, or more likely they will be reserved and identified next year, added to some funding next year. And even though we have requested the little bit of additional LTF funds, and now we have a little bit of excess RPA funds, it all has to do with what the different funding sources can be used for. So I think that's basically it. I just, again, want to tell you that when you see the final, it will be significantly higher than this. We'll be adding over a couple more carryover projects, and we will be increasing the estimated carryover amounts based on our best guess. And I'd be happy to respond to any questions. Okay.
Thank you, Loretta. So that brings us to agenda number 6D. That's the Transit Productivity Committee's recommendation. So as I've noted, this final allocation priority gets the lion's share, typically around 80% of the budget. This year, the same level of funding. Look at that bottom line on there, on that slide. It's a smaller percentage of the total just because we have some unallocated reserve and other funds carried over. So Of course, in the coming year, we've had, instead of the excess revenues we've gotten used to seeing in the last 2 or 3 years from the previous audit year, we have a shortfall, as I noted. So the Executive Committee and the Transit Committee have both recommended funding MTA's claim at the same level as last year and backfilling that claim from the unallocated reserve that I talked about earlier. There's a couple of months of sales tax revenue. So you do have that claim in your packet as well. You can take a look at what they're asking for. So it's just to keep them level at that $3,022,000 level. Now, also the Transit Committee has recommended reserving a balance of those unallocated LTF sales tax funds, just as the Executive Committee also did, until the unmet transit needs have been considered. So they are saying, as we've recommended staff also, that saving $421,000 of that. And that number did go up a little bit just because MTA's audit came in. It shows they owe us a little bit of money back this year due to an eligibility formula that has to be applied in the audit. And so that bumped this number back up a little bit for the reserve. So here's a good one. The Transit Committee also recommended a finding. We need to make a unmet transit need finding every year. You remember last fall, our advisory council met and came up with a list of unmet transit needs. In December, you had your public hearing, and people came up and talked about some more needs, and we generated this list, and that was sent off to MTA to analyze, and then come back to this Transit Committee to make a recommendation to you. They made a finding that 8 of those needs, there were 20 needs on this list, 8 of them are considered, could be found to be reasonable to meet. That's the formal finding you have to make. Contingent on a federal grant they applied for, that MTA applied for, to provide mobility management services. They think this mobility management position and program, when funded, would be able to solve a lot of these problems. Sometimes they're to do with dispatching and things like that. And guess what? Phil, didn't you just notice this morning that we were looking up the federal Section 5310 grant awards? Looks like they're getting that grant. Is that, or is that, that has another level to go still?
I'll report on that in a
Yeah.
little bit, but it looks like they've only recommended funding at 80% of the level. They've done that statewide. I think they're trying to spread the money out. That may impact some of the applicants who might not be able to come up with that extra 20% that they plan on having. So
we have a really good shot at MTA getting that grant, actually finding some needs were reasonable to meet. It's really been years since we've been able to meet any of these needs. So that will be great if that comes through. MTA's fiscal audit for 15-16 is in your packet on a consent calendar to be accepted, and you've got my report on that. Any other comments on transit from anybody? That looks like where we are. And I guess not. I'm not seeing Carla out there. Okay. So that's it on the local fund allocations. I just threw in these pictures for fun, just break from the numbers. We had a presentation at CalCog on the Burning Man Festival up in Nevada, and these were kind of cute, these little vehicles. People came up with some innovative, creative vehicle design. It's kind of fun. This is another one. I think it's more sculptural, not meant to be driven exactly. But anyway, getting back to our budget, here again is that one-page snapshot, and the green highlight is just to show you where the RSTP funds are on that chart. These are the discretionary federal dollars we exchanged for more flexible state funds. The name was changed to a block grant program under the new federal legislation, the FAST Act, Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act. But it's much the same program. So these are the allocation priorities by MCOG policy that was implemented from the board strategic planning back in 2010. The funding is based on federal estimates and allocated to the states by the state. Each state, California, will give us our regional allocation, and then we'll have that to work with. The three basic programs we have locally here at MCOG are the partnership funding program, and that basically leverages funds, partners up. Here's the good example is the first one we did was the Simpson Lane Roundabout, where, you know, taking $200,000 of MCOG's money from this fund, $1 million from the Caltrans had, and county had some funds. All together, we were able to actually build this roundabout. So that's the kind of thing we like to do with that. The second bullet there is our staff position for a regional project manager, providing local assistance and helping deliver projects by our local member agencies. Sometimes they're understaffed and they're not able to put as much effort into those things, and that's where we come in. So we have a dedicated funded position there. And the last one is the county and the cities, our member agencies, get the rest by formula. So this pie chart shows you the green is all going to our 4 cities in the county by a formula. So getting 75% of that, and the MCOG 2 programs there are getting a quarter of it. So this year, this budget year 17-18, the estimate is $743,000. We don't always get the amount they estimate. It tends to be a little less by the time we get there, depending on if the federal government has the money. We have not yet received the 16-17 funds. We're still waiting on that. So sometimes it takes a whole year for the money to come through. But according to MCOG's policy, just to show you what the allocations would be based on that estimate, the partnership funding program is always $100,000 off the top. And we do have a fund balance. It's been accumulating. It's up to about $900,000 now, less $250,000. It's already been committed to the Covelo Trail project on an as-needed basis. We'll see if that's needed. So we have about $650,000 in that fund right now. The staff position, the regional project manager, in this coming year's contract would be at $74,000, and that leaves, I should say, it's $90,000 is the policy to give to that position. We can only spend $74,000 on staff in the contract. The rest is for direct costs. There's about $16,000 there. So, for instance, if a project, one of our member entities has needs engineered cost estimates, say, and that costs several $1,000s to get from an engineer. Here's a place we can find that money.
I can just add in that the recent commitment a few months ago that we made to the city of Ukiah to help with bringing on an engineering study to deal with the impacts of the school impact bill changes came from that portion of the fund. It was available, and we were able to pretty readily respond to that request.
Right, and the executive director has discretion over that little small pot of money there and reports to you when we found a use for that. So also we have a carried over balance of about $85,000 in that fund too. So if we get this level of funds in 17-18, just give you an idea, Point Arena, we get $66,000 out of that, $100,000 for Willits, $107,000 for Fort Bragg, $160,000 for Ukiah. The county gets $119,000. So it's not a huge amount, but these funds are so flexible, they're really valuable to the member agencies. And the fund balance unclaimed right now at June 2016, our last audit was $1.9 million. Most of that is Ukiah's. I think they're saving up for a project, and we're waiting for a claim on that. Typically, our cities and counties aren't claiming every single year. They'll claim a chunk at a time, use it for some big project they have in mind.
I'll jump in here.
So it's your turn.
I know
Bill.
that.
Go ahead, jump in.
I know that the city has highway safety improvement project, the city of Ukiah, of about $1 million, and they've also had their Main Street, the State Street project has been delayed by STIP money, and that's a lot of the money that will come to complete the entire project the downtown, for the road diet that's planned in Ukiah. So that's responsible for a big amount of the balance, partly because of delays of other funding sources. And just like every other small city and small county, they have to sometimes bank a number of years of funding in order to get enough money together to do a meaningful project. That's why that fund balance exists.
So we have that in our accounts, earning interest, so that's a good thing. Anything else on that, Phil?
No.
Okay.
So I have one question on the partnership fund.
Yeah.
So it's accruing money, and has the technical advisory committee talked about any kind of process for looking for projects in the county? I mean, there's probably no shortage of projects, but what's the thought on looking for projects to fund with that?
Yeah, it's about time to bring it up again. If you recall, when I sold you with the concept many years ago, it was with the knowledge that sooner or later we're going to have to do something with the interchanges, because that 2005 study of the interchanges in Ukiah Valley, that's the first thing I thought of. Not too long ago, we completed, with Caltrans's help, a micro simulation model, and now we're in a position to start looking at different alternatives. Unfortunately, a project that the county had in the State Transportation Improvement Program was to do a project on North State Street, which involved the intersections, and we were all involved in that. But that had been delayed until now, hopefully just a 2018 STIP. And so the time to be looking at that again is, hopefully there's going to be some money in a STIP again, and we can look at those projects involving the North State Street interchange and see what additional commitments we need to make to interchange improvements. That's just one thing. I'm sure that other parts of the county will have some input in some of the cities as well. We'll plan on bringing it up in conjunction with the STIP, probably starting in August and September.
Thanks.
I don't want the money to sit there either, but some of these are going to be expensive projects. We need to accumulate some.
Yeah, and sometimes those projects fall between boundaries across jurisdictions, and it's kind of nobody in particular's job to do it. We try to bring the partners together and get something done in those cases. Okay, just a reminder, what's not in the budget, the STIP program, the State Transportation Improvement Program, and our regional program is capital. That does not flow through our cash accounts. It goes directly to those with projects. Also, of course, the Service Authority for Freeway Emergencies, the SAFE program, the call box program, has its own separate budget. A couple months back, you approved the new 5-year financial plan.
And I can add in there too that as of last week, we had completed another major installation. We only have a handful left to be fully implemented. Had a couple of right-of-way issues to deal with, so I think there's about 4 or 5 more sites to put in, and that we will have completely implemented the entire plan.
And that's a huge milestone. We've been working on this for years and years, and so many things have caused delays and set it back, but we've actually made great progress on that.
The latest setback occurred 3 months ago with the flooding in the Navarro River that wiped out 3 call boxes, completely flooded over them at the cost of about $35,000.
Kind of amazing. They were filled up with mud inside. Can you believe it? How high the waters had to get. So that's all what goes on in the SAFE program. Okay, and I'll just get to what's going on in the bigger world out there. On the national level, This is a chart from a couple of years ago. This is what the nation's highway trust fund looked like. That thick green line turning into red and diving down there. That's how it looked 2 years ago. Well, that would still be on the same track into deficit territory of about $80 billion. But for the infusions of general fund money that Congress has given it. So the FAST Act, that's our current federal bill for transportation, made an infusion of $70 billion of non-transportation general funds to shore up the $300 billion program for the next 5 years through the year 2020. So, you know, this was meant to be funded with user fees, but instead a good chunk of that, about a quarter or so, is coming out of general funds, and those are debt funded. You know, that's going to take at least 10 years to pay off that. So that's not ideal. That's not what we really want to see. Since 2008, Congress has transferred more than $143 billion, nearly all of that from the general fund, into the highway trust fund. So that's because the federal gas tax is still just 18 cents a gallon, and it's not indexed to inflation. And those of us working in the transportation sector have known for a long time that this isn't sustainable. The gas tax isn't working anymore as a funding source based on user fees. So that is why California has been developing its own funding sources for transportation, such as the self-help counties and cities you've heard about, where they have local sales taxes dedicated to transportation that have had to pass the voters on the ballot. We have 3 self-help cities here in Mendocino County. And 4 now, right? Ukiah?
No.
No.
They're general.
That was called, okay, so that was one that was a general fund with an advisory measure saying the city intends to spend a significant amount on streets.
So the
right?
practical effect, it will be
Yeah.
spent on transportation,
So-
but they won't qualify for the matching funds because it's not restricted by law for that purpose. Isn't that the case?
Correct.
Therein
You have
lies
to have
the
a
difference.
supermajority in order to qualify for the match that's
Right.
in the current legislation.
Yeah, so it takes 2/3 to get the dedicated sales tax for transportation, and that's what many counties, how many counties, Phil? 30? 20
Not
some?
that many. I think
25 or
I
so?
think 25 or 26.
Something like that,
Could-
yeah. So that's a high bar to reach, and those voters
But
wanted that.
all of those, almost every one of those counties are urban counties. There are no rural counties that are self-help. It's extremely hard to get it done.
And they're able to leverage those funds and get a lot done with that. Another thing that's happened is the road charge pilot program. I'll talk about that in a second. And now, also we have SB1, the state transportation funding bill, the Road Repair and Accountability Act of 2017. So just taking a look at those in a moment. Here, I've shown you this chart before, but I think it bears looking at again. It's just a way to put in perspective how much we pay in gas taxes. The average Californian has been paying $368 a year. And here's what they spend on cable TV, cell phones, coffee, and internet. They're way outstripping what they spend on gas tax. So the new SB1 funding bill will change this a little bit, not very much. The California Road Charge Pilot Program is just concluded on April 30th. And this was started by the legislature to approve this pilot project because, again, you know, the gas and excise and sales taxes aren't keeping up with maintenance needs, let alone improvements. So stakeholders have been seeking new ways of funding transportation, and a mileage fee is something that's being explored right now. The pilot went for 9 months with over 5,000 volunteers. I was one of those people. And over 37 million miles were driven by the participants during that pilot. So they tested various reporting methods from low tech to high tech, and no money changed hands during the pilot. Here are some of the ways people could report their miles and pay for their miles. Was you can get a time permit. You just pay for a block of time you'll be driving in California, or you can buy so many miles that you plan to drive and pay for it that way. You can
Those are generally conditions to deal with out-of-state drivers.
Yeah, it's a way to get around people who aren't permanent residents, and it's a way to address those people coming in and out. So you could do what I did, which was self-report your odometer reading. You had a choice of using your smartphone with or without the location services on, and I chose not to disclose all my locations to the government, even though there are some handlers, agencies between you and the state that are doing the program, implementing it. But even so, just on the principle, I thought, okay, for me, what I would choose is I'd like to use my smartphone, but I don't necessarily want to say everywhere I'm going. So what I do is take a snapshot of my odometer in my car once a month and upload it, and I'm done. And then you get a report and a statement, and it was really easy. And then the most high-tech way, of course, is just, a lot of the new cars have GPS built in and things. Or you could get a device from the program, or if you have one of those cars that tracks your miles, you can have it automatically report your miles. So we had the full range, paper reporting on up to, the highest tech smart reporting. So those are what were tested. They're coming out with a report. So Caltrans and California State Transportation Agency, CalSTA, are currently compiling a report of the findings for the policy and fiscal committees of the legislature and the CTC, California Transportation Commission, and to the Road Charge Technical Advisory Committee. So those entities will get this report, and that's scheduled for release in July 2017, in next couple months. And it will be up on their website. And additionally, that final report will be followed up by road charge recommendations from the CTC to the California legislature no later than December 2017. So we're going to hear about this pretty soon. It's kind of exciting. Phil, did you have anything else on that you wanted to mention?
No, the whole plan was to go through this process and have a recommendation to the legislature by the year 2020 as whether or not to implement it based on the success of this pilot program.
So they're ahead of that schedule. You served on that technical advisor, or you went and spoke a couple times to that committee?
Yeah,
right?
early on, yes, I did.
Okay, so that's that program. We'll hear more about that soon. Senate Bill 1, that was the Bell bill. Senator Bell and Frazier had the Assembly bill. They came together with the governor, other stakeholders, and worked out something that could actually be signed. That's been signed into law. It's taken a couple of years, finally enacted. So this is going to provide funding relief for our local agencies that take care of our transportation system and addressing some really long deferred maintenance issues. And we're all looking forward to getting that money. Just quick overview, it's $52 billion of new revenue over 10 years, and there's several things it's going to fund. Road repair is a big one, transit, rail, some planning grants, congestion corridors in the more urban areas, the Caltrans SHOP program, so operations and maintenance, and some loan repayments. So where that's going to come from is we're all going to pay 12 cents a gallon more in gasoline. We're going to pay more in our vehicle registration based on the value of our vehicles. Diesel is going up 20 cents a gallon for the excise tax and 4% diesel on sales tax. And for us electric vehicle freeloaders, we're going to start paying $100 a year starting in 2020. And that was kind of a compromise that got struck. I know, the electric vehicle, zero emission vehicle organizations were kind of fighting this a little bit. They felt like it was sort of a disincentive, still trying to get the numbers up of EVs in the state, but this is what they settled on. The fee won't start till 2020, so it seemed pretty fair. So, any comments, Phil, on the state bill that you know?
No, there's another, there's an agenda, a staff report for the agenda item later.
Coming up on reports in a minute, you're going to hear how much money we'll all see locally from that bill. Okay, so in conclusion, we're just about there. This is it. You've got the staff and committee recommendations for each aspect of the budget. And in June, next month's meeting, we'll have a budget package, this bound document that you're used to getting. It's got all the details, all the allocating resolutions, and exhibits and everything that goes into that. So you'll be prepared to adopt the budget next month, and it can be amended during the year. Typically, the planning program, as we've mentioned, is amended more than once during the year. That can affect the budget sometimes. And often MTA will come in with a revised claim calling for a budget amendment later on in the year. And that is all I have. So, any other questions?
Okay. Well, I think it's always helpful to have this May presentation on the budget leading into the adoption in June.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for your attention. Appreciate it.
And if any of the board members, after you take this home at night and read it, and stay awake long enough to read it, have any questions and clarifications, don't get a hold of me. Call Janet.
All right. I'd be happy to address anything else.
A question I have, Janet?
Oh.
Just what you said, we're going to find out shortly how much each city gets.
That'll be in Phil's report coming up next.
Report on the
coming
agenda.
Up next. Okay.
Yeah, right after consent calendar, we get into reports. Phil's got some details on that for you.
Thank you.
So that does take us to the consent calendar, and do we have a motion to approve the consent calendar, which is the April 11th minutes and the acceptance of the MTA Transit Fiscal Audit?
So moved. Second. I'll second.
Okay. Motion from Director Ranchik, second from Director McCowan. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Not seeing anyone opposed? Okay. So now we'll go and recess as the Policy Advisory Committee, reconvene as the RTPA. Do we have a motion to ratify?
So moved. Second.
Okay. Motion and second. All those in favor? Aye. Okay, now we're into information reports. MTA, I'll just report that the MTA meeting of April was going to be held in Point Arena, but it was canceled. I think there was scheduling conflict. I'm not sure why it was canceled. And North Coast Rail Authority, is there any update report? Anything? Okay. MCOG summary of meetings, which we do have in our packet.
Moving along, no comments.
Okay. Okay, then we're on to Road Repair Accountability Act of 2017.
You have my staff report and you have my disclaimer. Sometimes you get early information, and there's different ways that people who provide the information present their financial information. I think it is extremely good news to the counties and the cities. You see some of the numbers. If you look down 2/3 through my staff report, where I have 3 different years that I have preliminary information regarding how much the county is going to get for their road for the HUDA, the highway users tax. You have the first number, and then 2017, 18, you see a percentage behind it. That's the amount that it increases in the second year over the first year. And the same thing at 18, 19. That number is 48.85% higher than the second year. That's what I was trying to portray there. The numbers that I got from League of California Cities, same type of projection. This happens because these various fees and taxes kick in at different times over the period of the bill. Some of them not until 3 years later, such as the registration fee increase for ZEV owners. So these are the preliminary information that I had from the League of California Cities primarily. It's all very positive. It's also positive for, I believe, very much so for Mendocino Transit Authority, because the state transit assistance that they've been getting for a number of years has been all over the board in recent years, and there's going to be a chunk of these resources that are going to go, or will, I hope, at least stabilize the STA account. So I just would comment that last Tuesday that I was at the MCOG Directors meeting, and we were discussing the impacts of this, and it is primarily a streets and roads repair bill, and that's what it was advertised, and that's what it's going to be. It doesn't solve every problem, and of course I'm sitting right next to the representative from the executive director of the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, and he talked about, well, this is all well and good, but we have these greenhouse gas quotas that we have to do, and we have to do this, and we have to do that, and we have to do that. And when it came my turn to speak, I think I spoke mainly on behalf of the rural areas, and I said, a lot of the urban areas have some problems that we don't have to deal with. They have huge problems that we don't have to deal with because of where we live. But this bill will make some significant improvements and really help the cities and the counties the most. And that most of our problems that are statewide issues, we have a minimal response to deal with. But what hits us close to home are the needs of the county and the cities in our jurisdiction. And this is going to be a tremendous help in allowing them to fix or repair their local streets and roads. So once you start getting an infusion of the money, particularly in this county, since we also have a local option sales taxes, I really see that we'll be able to increase our pavement condition index significantly. That's all I have to report on the staff report, other than what you see written in front of you.
So Phil, I agree. I mean, I think this is tremendously good news for the county and city streets. One thing on your report, you wrote that the matching fund for the state-local partnership is expected to be $20 million per year. For some reason, I thought it was going to be $200 million per year. Is that a typo, or you're sure it's $20 million?
You caught me off guard. I'll take your word for it. $200 million.
I thought I saw something else that was $200 million a year, but maybe not.
I thought it was. I don't have that. I don't have my information right in front of me. The state and local partnership part.
Anyway,
let's hope it's a bigger number.
And just one comment on the media coverage of this. Has been kind of disappointing in that almost every article I've read is all about the tax, and almost nothing in the article about what the tax actually funds. I mean, it's weird because if you look at the figures, and very few articles have pointed out that the last time the gas tax was raised, Bill Clinton was a young man at that point, 1994. State gas tax, federal gas tax hasn't been raised since 1994. And actually, if you do the math, if the gas tax had been raised 1 penny every 2 years, we'd be exactly where we are today with this tax increase. So
it was actually 1991 because it was a 3-year incremental.
But I think 94 was the last year it ticked up. And it's been that lack of indexing of the tax over the years that has caused a lot of the deferred maintenance. I don't know. I just think that a lot of the news coverage has been kind of disappointing.
Yeah, that's why you got to go back and look at that one slide that Janet put in there about the relative cost people pay on cable TV and a number of coffee. And when you add it, when you look at that in relative terms, when you're riding on streets and roads with a bunch of potholes that might blow your tires and possibly give you send you to the shop to get some suspension repairs or a realignment, it's a relatively moderate cost. Unless you're one of those people who has a ZEV who's been freeloading for years.
Okay. Any questions or comments on the report?
Yeah, I just want to be clear. If there's any limitations on what this can be spent on, or is this, you know, it looks like a doubling in 2 years of what UKI is going to get from the state for road repairs. Is that?
Yeah, because as
accurate?
I said at the beginning, these different taxes and fees kick in at different times, so it takes a while.
Yeah, but it's dedicated for road repairs.
Yes.
Actual tar and gravel, real repair.
Well, it's going to be up to each jurisdiction to decide how they're going to spend it, of course. Yeah, I mean, in some cases, you're going to need to buy equipment, but I would imagine most of it is going to go to rehabilitation and maintenance of your pavement.
Okay, thank you.
It's going to be coming to you through those old traditional gas tax sources, 2106, 2107, 2107.5 that these guys like him recognize.
Okay. Well, I think we are all reading as much as we can about this as it develops. But I mean, we know the formulas have been approved. It's just a matter of seeing those formulas in print kind of makes it more tangible.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Where are we? Are we on where? I gotta go back. Yeah. I was gonna report this under Mendocino Transit Authority, but we just received some news this morning from the, everybody knows about the FTA Section 5310. What else do I need to explain? It's a grant program for federal funding for transit, and there are two parts of it. One is kind of they have a new terminology this year, expanded projects, but the part that we're most familiar with are the traditional projects for funding vehicles, and a lot of what the local senior centers have, and in some cases some of the travel programs, they depend on replacement vehicles through the FTA Section 5310. Just this morning we got the word that South Coast seniors, these are preliminary recommendations, but they're going to be going to the California Transportation Commission, scored high enough to get a small bus replacement project, and that's something that Nefili Barrett, who was here earlier, works with all the senior centers on, and they actually were successful, a little lower score for a second small bus. Redwood Coast Seniors in Fort Bragg also is being recommended for a small vehicle replacement project, and the Consolidated Tribal Health, which operates a system, has also been recommended for a small bus replacement project. In addition, the Consolidated Tribal Health project is being recommended for some operating assistance to run that vehicle, as well as Mendocino Transit Authority, who applied for I mentioned this earlier, a mobility management position is being recommended for funding also, as well as, here's another one, South Coast Seniors recommended for some operating assistance through that program. I was told by Nafili before she left that the recommendations came in at a level 20% lower than they applied for. So you might have to temper your enthusiasm, at least the agencies running us, to figure out if they can still operate these programs with 20% less revenues than the state is willing to give them. We went through this before a number of years ago. I don't understand some of the rationale that comes out of the Mass Transit Division of Caltrans. Sometimes when you try to be too nice and cut down everybody by 20%, you're killing some programs. And I know they've done that in the past, and I'm afraid that's what they're recommending again at this time. So overall, really good news. That just came out today. The benefactors of these have not heard about this yet.
Okay, so we're on to planning staff. I think. Unless you have anything other miscellaneous, we're going to go to planning staff.
I am just going to say no. It's late enough.
So I wanted to update you on some current transportation grant funding items. There are several grant programs that are out right now with a call for projects with due dates in the near future or just passed that we've been working with the county and the cities on. And there's a program through the Strategic Growth Council, the Urban Greening grant program. The purpose is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, reduce the vehicle miles traveled, and sequester and store carbon by tree planting. So we worked with the city of Ukiah, and they have submitted, well, it's actually due today, an application for phase 3 of the Rail with Trail project. So
We have an hour and a half left.
Yeah. And they did submit a one-pager that the staff at Sacramento looked over and then went ahead and encouraged them to apply, so that was good. And then there's a couple other programs coming up. The Environmental Enhancement and Mitigation Grant, those applications aren't due until June 21st. I will be attending a workshop in Sacramento in the next week or so to learn more about that program. We think we may have some eligible projects countywide. And there's an active transportation grant workshop on May 12th in Sacramento, which I plan to attend. And then we worked with the county. We wrote a support letter for their Federal Land Access Program, their FLAP grant, applying for funding for East Side Potter Valley Road. And there's just several programs that we're monitoring and doing what we can to support and help local agencies. And then moving on to the next agenda item, the Caltrans Sustainable Transportation Planning Grant Awards. We are pleased that the county's Orchard Avenue feasibility study, Orchard Avenue Extension feasibility study application was finally approved. This is the third time they've applied, and so that was approved. So we're happy about that. And I think that's it under grants. And then under miscellaneous, just wanted to report that James Sookney, the MCOG admin staff, is going to be doing bike and pedestrian counts at the elementary schools in 7 communities in support of our active transportation Safe Routes to School grant over the next few weeks.
And he just put them out today.
Good. So that's it. That's all.
Okay, thanks. Let's see, where does it put us on our calendar, our agenda? So then we have, under planning, do we have 17, 18 sustainable transportation planning grants? You just covered that?
I did. That was
Yeah. Okay, and no miscellaneous? Okay, so director reports. Go ahead.
If I may, for those of you who do not know him, Scott Ignacio is in the audience. He is the LAFCO representative of the city of Point Arena, the mayor of Point Arena, and the alternate for this body.
good.
Hello.
Okay.
Welcome. Thank you. I'll be the one to say it.
Any
Hi,
other director reports? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to mention something else on my list of interests. This will take a minute, sorry. A couple times through today's meeting, I've heard mention of greenhouse gas reductions, and that's general issue is on my mind. And about a year ago, I explained to the group something I was working on toward that end, and some of the newer people haven't heard that. I've been trying to lobby or somehow arrange for the Costco project for the city of Ukiah to include some more reasonable offsets for the additional greenhouse gases from people driving, all over this region of the state. And so I thought I should mention every time I hear this, I hear about a program to reduce greenhouse gases, I think to myself, some of the greenhouse gases you're going to be reducing are to make up for those going to be created by the new Costco. And that's because it looks like I'm going to lose this battle. So what I've been hoping for over 2 years now is that the city and the people involved in the project would come to their senses on this issue and require solarizing the roof, or as I explained a few years ago, solarizing a roof in a much dirtier electricity market. That would be elsewhere in the state. But nonetheless, as more significant offsets for the additional greenhouse gases than the requirements that are going to be required, which is electric gardening tools, if you can keep a straight face when you hear that, and requiring Costco to use electric warehouse equipment like forklifts, which they're going to do anyway. But nonetheless, I thought I should tell everybody, it looks like I'm going to lose this battle because it's really, really not required. The law says you don't really have to do anything more significant than any minimal stuff like this if the problem is not significant. And Costco's additional greenhouse gases, even though the problem is huge and the state's passing laws and it's on the governor's mind, all this stuff, but the Ukiah Costco's piece of it is small enough where it's quote unquote not significant, and therefore we can do as little as we want, and that's the way it's headed. I'm still trying to pull another rabbit out of the hat if I can to make this happen. But I thought I should mention this because it really kind of torques me off that there can be people in government one place who just don't care about this and likely made some kind of a deal with Costco way back in the beginning, is my suspicion about this, which would be 4 or 5 years ago. And then here we are in another organization trying to work on programs that cut greenhouse gases. And I just find that ridiculous. But anyway, I thought I should tell everybody it doesn't look good right now. And so there you have it.
So I have a question. If people were shopping in Mendocino County at Costco in Santa Rosa and instead they shop in Ukiah, that will reduce greenhouse gases.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yes.
and if you want to see them have solar on their roofs, but they're getting City of Ukiah electricity, then it seems to me all you have to do is get the City of Ukiah's electricity as green as possible, and you've accomplished the same thing.
Well, it's already as green as possible.
Well, there you go. Good.
It's the
Then they don't need
second
solar.
greenest in the state. Well, they don't need it here, but I'm not sure quite all the logic you're mentioning, but one of the things that gets mentioned is that, well, all these people are driving to Santa Rosa. Well, okay, so they're going to be going to Ukiah now. That's a shorter drive. That's true. But what about all the people that are going to be the new customers? Because they're going to be driving, like people used to drive an hour down to Santa Rosa from here. Well, now people are going to be driving an hour to Ukiah from wherever, Laytonville, Westport, over on the coast. That didn't, those are going to be new customers, and it's those that I care about. If Costco didn't expect to have a whole bunch of new customers from from these areas, they wouldn't be building the store. They're certainly not building it to make it more convenient for their existing customers to not have to drive an hour. No company would do that. So they're banking on, a lot of new customers, and they're going to be driving the kind of distances like local people are today to go to Santa Rosa. And that makes for additional greenhouse gases. And the mitigations that are being required by the city and have been agreed to in the past by the Planning Commission and the City Council, with yours truly as the one minority vote, that's going to come up again in the coming few months. Again, for final approval. Some of you might know there was a lawsuit that delayed the project 2 years. So all of the process steps after the settlement of the lawsuit are now being undergone. And there'll be a hearing by the Planning Commission on the 24th of this month, I think it is. And then it'll come to the City Council probably in early June. So the opportunity, to take a bite out of greenhouse gases as part of this project looks like it's not going to happen. And, I argue that it is going to create more. I think the documentation says it'll be creating more because of the additional new customers, regardless of the current customers that will be driving the lesser distances. And, the mitigations, which I think are obvious to do, they're just not going to do. By the way, Costco's catalog, you might know, you can go online, look in their catalog, and you can find a turnkey, pay one price, get all the pieces, photovoltaic system for your roof. It's in their catalog, but they won't put it on their own building. So anyway, I thought I should tell everybody that. Every time I hear the mention of greenhouse gas reduction, it reminds me of this. And it looks like, it's not going to go the way I would like it to go.
Any other director reports?
I would like to thank Fort Bragg for a wonderful trip that we took last month, and I just thought that they did a really nice job of showing us all their new things and all the things that we went on, and a delightful lunch, and I just thought it was
Hey,
really
we
nice.
paid for the lunch.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll adjourn now at 3:44.
Thank you very much. We had a lot to go through today, and it will save you next month, I guarantee you.